Words from the 16th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, "Some say you are John the Baptist, but others Elijah, still others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." He said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor, spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington this past week. A few of her words bear repeating. She told how, like all people, she'd had some ups and downs in her life of faith. Although daughter and granddaughter of Presbyterian ministers, she said, "When I first moved to California in 1981 to join the Stanford faculty, there were a lot of years when I was not attending church regularly. I guess I traveled a lot and was always in some other time zone. One Sunday, though, I was in Lucky's supermarket, not very far from my house. I will never forget. Among the spices, and an African-American man walked up to me and said he was buying some things for his church picnic, and he said, 'Do you play the piano by any chance?' How it ever occurred to him that this stranger might play the piano, I'll never know. I said, 'Yes.' He said they were looking for someone to play the piano at his church. It was a little African-American church right in the center of Palo Alto, a Baptist church. So I started playing for that church, and that got me regularly back into church going. I don't play gospel very well. I play Brahms. And you know how black ministers will start a song in some unknown key, and the musicians are supposed to pick it up. I had no idea what I was doing, and so I called my mother, who had played for Baptist churches. 'Mother,' I said, 'they just start. How am I supposed to do this?' She said, 'Honey, just play in the key of C, and they'll come back to you.'" And as I've discovered, that's true. If you play in C, people will come back. And I thought to myself, my goodness, God has a long reach. I mean, in Lucky's supermarket, in the spices on a Sunday morning. A long time ago, an itinerant teacher from Nazareth, Israel, said, "I will build my church." And though he was a carpenter or a stonemason, he was not talking about construction, nor did he mean organization or ordination or icons or organs or committees or cathedrals, as important as these may all have become down the years. "You are Peter, the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church." And that rock is not so much the person of Peter as it is the faith he has just confessed, the faith that in Jesus we discover God and purpose and life. When the text speaks of church, it uses the Greek word ekklesia, literally the assembly, the community formed out of that faith in him and his Father, informed by his spirit of trust and hope and love. So wherever people gather together because of that reality, together out of common faith and mutual care and ultimate hope, there is church. Church is you and me singing hymns here on Sunday morning, along with the priests and people of the National Cathedral in Washington, and the choirs of St. Peter's in Rome, and the Good News folk north of Howard, and the Calvinist congregation of Budapest, and the Kenilworth Church of England, and a million like gatherings circling round the globe this very day. I wore this stole today because a Jewish friend brought it to me this very past week from an Arab Christian woman who made it, who lives in Gaza, Palestine. And church is also third graders memorizing the Beatitudes with their teachers, not very far from us right now, and young people off on retreat in the North Woods, and caring friends visiting a sick room in the hospital, and board meetings to run schools and homes or lend loans to third world entrepreneurs, neighbors sharing hopes and concerns over morning coffee, mothers and dads and Dutch uncles leading youth to do their duty for God and country, people recovering who gather around what they call 12 steps, a friendly phone call to another in loneliness or need, counselors seeking to help people become whole. This too is church, all of it. Church is wherever human beings captured by His Spirit meet and lift and hug and listen and plan and encourage and labor and pray. I will build my church. So this means, of course, first of all, that we did not create the church. The church created us. The church has shaped us in ways that are central to our very being, essential to our lives. Most of us here this morning are the creation of His Spirit in the church, somewhere, if not recently, once upon a time, even during rebellion, even if parts of our psyche are long unvisited that have been impacted upon by church. I'm a creation of the church. Oh, I've done my remodeling, or tried to, made my own adaptations over time, but the older I grow, the more I realize how much I am the creation of His community of faith, the communities of faith through which I've wandered down my years. Who am I today? I'm the son of the little guy who marched a block and a half every Sunday morning to Mrs. Hart's third grade Sunday school class, who marveled at Moses and the Dead Sea on the flannel board, who drank in the ideals of life and love spoken of there and prayed for in a home of that congregation. You see, I know now that they're woven into the very texture of my being. Behind my desk in my study, not far from here, is a photograph of the entire congregation in 1939, out in the intersection of Minor and McCracken Avenues in front of Lakeside Baptist. Not too many cars in 1939, you could do that. And there I am, 8 years old, in suit and tie, big as life. In the storm and stress of my adolescence, that church taught me to set limits to my passions and to sing I Would Be True. It gave me a vision of the meaning of life. At the lakesides of summer camp, I heard the challenge to make of my life a ministry and responded with a new sense of excitement and direction. When my heart was reamed with sorrow at the loss of a father and best friend, my church drew me to another friend of all the grieving and assured me the hope of another morning, eternal and tearless. When love entered my life in the presence of a young woman, the church led me to her Lutheran altar and to the vows which made of a romance, a covenant, and a lifelong journey. And it's still there, even apart from my vocation as a minister, a spirit and presence, faces and voices, past and here today, prodding, pushing, inspiring, consoling, still shaping me down through the years. The church has created me, has created you more than you know. And that's good to know, because it means that it's finally not of our doing or undoing. Its future does not depend upon our faithfulness or ingenuity. It has been there, the church has, this community of faith, this community of His Spirit for almost 2,000 years, and it'll be there long after we are gone, when our names peer out from the stones behind the euonymus out there in the garden. And it'll be there for our children and our grandchildren whenever they need it, whatever may come. How would you like to live in a town called Bazaar? By the way, the bazaar is back. In the town of Bazaar, the oldest village in Chase County, Kansas, the grocery store and the filling station went some years ago. The school has been shut down, and the government recently closed the post office. So about all that is left is the Methodist Church, and Blanche, the former postmistress, conducts a little devotional service for all 12 citizens of Bazaar, Kansas, every Sunday. She also rings the church bells, adding, nobody hears them except those of us already there, but I guess that's who they're for. I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not stand against it. Hell, the anxiety of illness, the loneliness of loss, the guilt of failure, the emptiness of defeat, the enervation of old age, the disappointments of life. That's hell, the real hell maybe. But here's an army against which they cannot stand. I'm sure some of you have experienced it this past week, somebody in this congregation, some crisis, some unexpected reversal or illness, and it was scary and it was hard. But inner hope and strength, faith in God, were sustained by the phone calls and prayers, the sense of support you felt from a great invisible group of faithful gathered round in spirit. And for one more week, the gates of hell did not stand. The church has created us, and the church is there for us. Novelist Dan Wakefield, well known in New York at least, he describes his own turn from despair to faith in the rediscovery of the community. He portrays a treacherous time in his life. A long-standing relationship with a woman had just dissolved. He was out of money, had just buried within the span of 7 months his mother and his father. His work no longer seemed satisfying, and alcohol had become all too attractive a means of escape. I was, he writes, headed for the edge of a cliff. A chance conversation in a neighborhood bar with a house painter who was looking for a place to go to Mass on Christmas Eve led Wakefield to seek out a Christmas candlelight service in the neighborhood, then to participation in other services of worship, a little Bible study, and a gradually developing devotional life of his own. As Wakefield's religious involvement increased, he experienced a growing freedom from his sense of drifting purposelessness and from what he calls my assortment of life-numbing addictions. He writes, at some point or other, they felt as if they were lifted, taken away, and life had begun again. But if there's any tragedy abroad in our time, I feel it is the growing inclination of so many to try and survive without membership in the community of faith. I don't mean allegiance to some particular denomination. I don't mean a name on a roll of some particular congregation. And I am certainly not promoting Kenilworth Union. I mean life apart from any real community of continuity and tradition and loyalty and love. I mean life isolated, life apart from faithful relationships with others of like faith and spirit, compassion and care. I mean life where personal advancement and individual desires are put above sharing and service, where being and doing together take back seat to the agendas and addictions and schedules of life in a culture like our own here on the North Shore. One little guy asked his father why he kept bringing home office work every night. His dad explained that it's because he had so much to do he just couldn't finish it during the day. The boy asked, in that case, why don't they put you in the slower group? I mean life where individual freedom and convenience and ambition and obsession come before duty and obligation to neighborhoods and institutions and church in any form. I think what chills me about the future is a general sense of the transformation of our society from one that strengthens the bonds between people to one that is at best indifferent to them, a sense of an inevitable fraying of the net of connections between people at many critical intersections of which the marital is only one, and each fraying accelerates the other. A break in one connection, such as attachment to a stable faith community, puts pressures on other connections, on marriage, on the relationships between parents and children, a feeling of connection with a grander past. Only 3 to 5% of Europeans are involved in a faith community of any kind. Only 20% of Americans. Someone wonders why some people change churches. What difference does it make which one you stay home from? Adolescents often abandon church because competition and advancement count more, and they're too busy, and their friends don't go, and their parents don't seem to care much one way or the other. Is it because we live in a time of such individual self-indulgence that we flee the bonds and obligations, the commitments and duties of real community? And it is tragic because we are created and sustained by our communities of common faith and value, allegiance and shared life. And to believe otherwise is sheer psychological naivete. Any member in any of the 12-step programs knows that. Couples involved in a community of faith are 10 times less likely to divorce. People who worship live longer and healthier lives than those who do not. Young people, for example, those who are part of our youth program, who are actually part of it, are 10 times less likely to indulge in self-destructive behavior. People who participate in a community of faith are far more likely to be involved in community service and care for the less fortunate than those who do not belong. The statistics are all utterly clear. The old story is right in the most practical, down-to-earth manner. There is no such thing as saving, life-giving faith apart from life in community. To try to manage on our own alone is to risk losing our lives, our souls, to a secular, even pagan world. And so they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers in their homes, in the temple. So the church has created us, and the church is there for us, and we are called to be there for it. Not everybody will be equally involved, I know that. There are stages in life when other responsibilities take over. There are times, however, when we need it most, and we will be drawn in close. But somebody has to nurture and sustain it in this age when so many have turned self-indulgent and indifferent. One elderly friend, always in church when his schedule permitted, he didn't hold an office. As years went on, he was no longer in a position to teach or even be an usher, but he could be and was faithful. And one Sunday morning, he came to me to apologize for not having done more, and told me with some wistfulness in his eyes that no one would ever know how much the church had meant to him over the years, and he just wanted me to know, and he could not help but continue to support its ministry for those who would come after him. And I think his eyes lit up a little bit when I told him that he would never know how much his loyalty had been inspiration and support for me. But it's really not a matter of clergy or professional elites. The survival of the church has never rested on these. Church was built, Jesus built the church on the faith of people like Peter and Andrew and Martha and Mary, men and women with all the gifts and failings, cares and enthusiasms of all of you gathered here this morning. Church community is really about individuals of faith who take the time to care. So does church happen in response to the Spirit of Jesus passed on from friend to friend down the centuries. And where it happens, not even the gates of hell stand a chance.